right. My battery just died. Best day ever, right? Can't hear me? It was supposed to be a joke. Okay, you guys are like, okay. No. So quick question this morning as we get started. How many in this room love, like you're a movie buff, love movies? Anybody? Okay. You guys just aren't feeling it. 7 people? 7, okay. Fair enough. So we're going to turn this into like a hootenanny. It's going to get real weird. I just want you, anybody, just tell me. Online, you can type it in. What, like, favorite movie of all time? What you got? Anybody? Wait, hold on, wait. Someone yelled from far from the back something weird, I think. What? Prostitute! Actually, I love it. I'm not going to lie. Best movie ever. Okay. Yes. Anyone else? So this is going to give me some time to do this. Go ahead. Just yell it out. It's going to get weird. I heard somebody else here. Titanic. You and my wife every day. Like my wife. Goonies. I like that. I respect old school. No school like the old school. Okay. Anybody else? Wizard of Oz. Now we're really going flashback. I like it. We can do this all day, but I know none of you would show up for this. So give me 1 second. I'm going to switch this. Am I good? Good? Okay, good. All right, so anyways, I was thinking about my top, and I'm going to give you the Trent Carpenter top 5 in no particular order as we get started, because I love a good movie. Best probably ever, Rocky. Right? Can't deny it. Been watching them this week with my daughter. We're back in as strong as ever. Second favorite, Rocky 2. Guess what 3 is? Rocky 3. And 4, Rocky 4. And Rudy. Very good. No, and the reason I'm telling you guys that is as we think about stories, I think it's why we love movies. We love movies because, to me, a movie, like anything with a great story, right? And as we're kind of talking about today, I want you to think about your story, and I've got a question for you. You guys in this room, you guys watching online, but what if there's a possibility that God wants your life to be a great story? You ever thought about that? What if God, hopefully as you walked in, we always talk about purpose and this whole series about finding your purpose. But if you walk in, it's like our purpose is to help you find your purpose. Why? Because we believe wholeheartedly, I believe this with everything inside me. All of you in this room were designed on purpose and for a purpose. There's no accidents. There's no, that's just Bob. Bob's Bob. No, it's like you were truly designed by your Creator with intention, with intentionality. And as we kind of go through this series, we have kind of 5 questions that we want to talk about. And as you think about your story, okay, really this is kind of the theme of all this. Today, what if God really wants your life to tell a great story? And I've got good news for you. You see, your story, like Pretty Woman, like Titanic, like Jake, right? Like Wizard of Oz, your story has an unfair advantage when God's in it. Do you know that? Your story actually has an unfair advantage. Why? Because God tells us, He says, hey, I can take everything that the enemy meant for evil. I can take all the things in your life that were not supposed to turn out well, and I can use them for my purpose and my glory. God can flip the script on any story that happens, and that's the beauty of the good news. And I got to thinking about this, and I had an unfair advantage growing up. And my mom's in here, my dad's out there probably drinking coffee, who knows what he's doing. But I was thinking about my parents, they were young, had us young parents, awesome, great parents. But my favorite thing is my parents had street smarts. They did. There's so many times I've watched them and kind of how they handled people. And I was this week's been a tough week and kind of a lot of tough stuff going on in my life. And so I was just kind of thinking through different stories of my life. And I started laughing thinking about my dad. Because I thought my dad, could be a great con artist. He might be a con artist, but he could be a great one. I mean, he's just kind of that, talking a lot. And as the more I would be around my dad growing up, I realized he focuses a lot on kind of how people think, why they think, what motivates them. Yeah, like a con artist would, right? Like you play to people's emotions. But I got to think when we were kids, We had, there's always different people moving in and out. I grew up in Arabia, Ohio, so there's like 12 of us. So people were always moving in and out. I remember once we had this couple that moved in for a short time, and when they moved in, all of a sudden, everything started missing. Things were getting stolen left and right. Like people were like, I don't have a chainsaw. So it's a small community, and forever nothing was ever stolen. Now all of a sudden, this, new family moves in, things are getting stolen. It's like, what's going on here? And I remember our neighbor, she was a sweet old lady. They're all concerned because we were leaving for like a long weekend to go on a camping trip. We hardly ever went on vacation, excited, but they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to be going, we're going to get robbed blind. And I remember like right before we left, my dad went over to that house and he said, hey, knocked on the door. Hey, I want you to know we're leaving for vacation. We'll be going like all weekend. Is there any chance you could watch our house for us? And I remember another neighbor being like, dude, that's the dumbest thing ever. Like, you're going to come back. You want to have a house. They're going to literally put your house on wheels and take it away, right? Came back, not a thing missing. Not one thing missing. And for the longest time, people were still missing stuff. But I remember he came back and the guy said, I watched it every day. I watched it. Isn't that a good con artist move? All of our neighbors were losing stuff left and right for the rest of the time. No, right, Louisville Street Smart. That's an unfair advantage. That's what God offers us. So what I want to share with you today, this whole series, we're going to talk about a guy named Paul. Paul had this kind of radical conversion to Christianity. He hated Christians. He hated the church. We're going to see today in Galatians, he kind of recaps his story. He's like, okay, let me tell you guys where I'm at. And the reason we want to share that, we said this whole series, today's question 1, we want to give you 5 questions that can kind of get you thinking about your personal purpose. And these 5 questions, real quick, today we're going to talk about what are the stories that shape you? What are the stories? Because all of us in here have a story and stories. Second question is, what are the giftings that make you? What are the topics that shake you? What are the investments that take you? And what are the perspectives that wake you? Some of you are like, Trent, did you make that up? I did not. I stole it from a book. But as we look at Paul today, we're going to see him tell the story and the stories that shaped him. So I already told you the good news is even if your story's not good, you've got an unfair advantage. So what are just a couple thoughts? We're in Galatians chapter 1. Like I said, Paul's going to recap his story. And I want to give you some thoughts as he kind of tells his story that I think we can pull out that's good news for us. The first is this: your past story prepares you for your future purpose. All of you in here have a past. Some good, some bad. Some awesome, some tragic. But all of us in this room have a past, and God always takes our past story and prepares us for our future purpose. Look what Paul says in 13. He says, you know what I was like when I followed the Jewish religion, how I violently persecuted God's church. He literally hated the church. You see, Jesus comes on the scene. They're all like, is he the Son of God? He claims to be. We don't know. Goes to the cross, dies, comes back to life, meets with his followers, and is like, now I'm giving you the power to go do what I've done. And they start like taking over the known world. Well, they called it the way. The early church was called the way, the Jesus way. Paul hated it. He's like, look, I literally tried, I violently persecuted them. And I love this line. He said, I did my best to destroy it. I hated the church. What we're doing right now, he hated the church. Hated it. That's what Paul says. I read a book like 12, 15 years ago called David and Goliath. Now, here's the cool thing. It's by a guy by the name of Malcolm Gladwell, writes a ton of books. It's not a Christian book, but here's the concept, okay? And I was thinking about this. If our past story prepares us for our future purpose, what's that look like? And I got to think about that book, and it's awesome. If you haven't read it, I'd really suggest it. It's an amazing book. But here's what the point is. He's not even coming from a Christian perspective. He says, everyone says David versus Goliath was the underdog. David was the underdog. And he says, but if you really look into the story, and again, this is his take, agree, disagree. He's like, maybe he wasn't the underdog, though. Now, we all know God was with him and all that, but he's saying from just a practical standpoint, Goliath was huge. So if you fought Goliath hand to hand, yes, it's over. But he said there's also some things you'll read throughout history, and some things point in the Old Testament, Goliath couldn't see very well. Maybe because he's large and a lot of different biological factors, but he didn't move well either. And he said, think about this. David was a slinger. So David, you remember when he comes to the king, he's like, look, I've had bears, I've had lions, oh my. I've had a lot of animals attack and do. Remember what he said? He's like, I killed them all. What, with your hands? No. David was a master from long range. Now think about that for a second. Malcolm Gladwell says, if you think about it, everyone watches the fight, and it's a little tiny boy and a giant, and you're like, it's over. But what if his strength is actually in the reason he's an underdog? He's a long-range guy. And he goes on to tell these amazing stories. I could tell them all day. They're so cool. But one I was thinking about, was so neat to me, was this guy by the name of David Boies. He is considered the best trial lawyer maybe in the history of the world, also dyslexic. And they start to tell a story, and this is what's awesome from this lawyer. He said, I couldn't hardly read in school. It was a struggle to be in school. I hated school. And he said, in third grade, I made a decision. My parents are on me, you got to pass, you got to do this. And he said, so I had a plan. He said, I would try to pay attention, try to do the best I could, but I would wait till the week before, or the day before grades came out, and I would go to every single teacher I had. He said, my goal was always the same. I would ask them what grade I had, and I'd try to get it up 2 letters. He said, so if I had a C, I was going to try to talk that lady and give me an A. He said, if I had a D, I'm trying to get it to a B. He said, some classes I walked in like, you're failing. And he was like, I got to get it to a C. And here's what he said. He said, you would think a lawyer who couldn't read would be a major disadvantage. But he said, they don't know something about me. Since I've been in the 3rd grade, I've been arguing and pleading my case with adults, people way smarter than me. He said, I've been doing this my whole life just to survive. And the point the author makes is what we all look at and say, oh, that part of your story, you can't use it. He's like, it's the best part of my story. And you see, that's how God works. God says, I want to take your past story because I've been preparing you the whole time for your future purpose. This is what Paul's saying. He's like, as I'm destroying this, I thought there's no way I would ever be part of this church I'm trying to destroy. But God actually used that exact thing for him. Second part's this. It's good news. Redemption rewrites your story with purpose. Redemption. God redeems and can redeem everything. The parts of your life you don't want to think about, and I'm not saying you got to hash all that up, but God's like, no, I can still redeem that. You know why? Because God can take things that are dead, still redeem them. Redemption rewrites all of our stories with purpose. Look at verse 14. He says, I was far ahead of my fellow Jews in my zeal. So he's like, they hated you guys. I took it to a new level. I was far ahead of my fellow Jews in my zeal for the traditions of my ancestors. But even before I was born, get this redemption, God chose me and called me by his marvelous grace. Then it pleased him to reveal his son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. I was sitting in the 9:30. I was up here at the 9:30. And there was a lady, a little bit older than me, that was sitting in the back corner. And they did what we're doing tonight here. They did the table at one of the recovery places. And one of the ladies that I know, and maybe you've heard me say this, is awesome though. One of the ladies that I know said she was in there and she's like, I'm trying to be nice to them and they're okay. I mean, they kind of like me. And she's like trying to tell them that, Jesus loves you unconditionally and okay. And she said, I give my spiel and these girls are like, okay, but they still have babies at home. They have kids at home. They're pulled away from everything they know. They're in a tough spot. And she said this. She said in Tool, and she said this lady at C3, she said, can I say something? And this is a lady who's overcame incredible addictions. Her life is so amazing right now. But you know what she said? I've been exactly where you girls are right now. And all I want you to know is you can be where I'm at too. And this other lady told me, you know what she said? She said, they could care less about the rest of us. They didn't know we existed anymore. They all were just like, we want to hear from you. Why? Because God took her story and he not only redeemed it, he used it for a greater purpose. That's the best part of the good news. Now, if you think about this for a second, it's like, wait a minute. God, why would you choose the guy who's super Jewish, I can't say that word for some reason, to go to the Gentiles? So let me kind of explain how the system worked back then. In the old times, you had the Jews who were considered God's people, and they knew it. They probably even had a little bit of arrogance and confidence because we're God. Literally, God called them, you're my chosen people, right? So you had the Jewish people who were God's chosen people. Then you had everybody outside of the Jews. They were called Gentiles. We're Gentiles, all of us in this room, unless you're converted from being a Jewish, probably not. We're all Gentiles. But they were the outsiders, and the Jews are always like, no, we're God's people, you're not. And Paul's like, I didn't realize, but God's plan was for me to take the good message, this good news of Jesus, and take it to the group that we always thought God didn't even like. Now think about this for a second. Does it make sense to choose the most hardcore Jewish man, teacher, synagogue persecutor to reach out to this group? It sounds like a disadvantage, but what if it's actually the greatest advantage? Why? Because you could get a fellow rabbi, and he's like, well, I know the law. Let me explain it to you. And Paul's like, you don't think I know that? I've got all that memorized too, bud. Because you had this whole group saying, no, do not let. That was the earliest struggle of the early Christians. They're like, how can you let those people in? God doesn't like them. And Paul's like, he does. He loves them. And then he could argue the case because he knew more than most of them. I got thinking about, for me, God, if you wanted to start a church, you wouldn't pick me. I thought some of you would be like, yes, he would. You didn't. You guys are agreeing. You're like, we know, Trent. Every week, I get in the car with my wife and say, he shouldn't be there. I get it. But you know why I have bold confidence, even if none of you think I should be on stage? Because my mom tells me and my wife tells me I'm doing a great job. Okay, and I know they would not be biased at all. But here's the bottom line. You take someone who, my wife, she was the candidate for this. She literally, I think she came out of the birth canal and just went straight into the baptism tub. They just baptized her. My wife, if you say, she can't think of a weekend of her life that she wasn't part of a local church. It was just awesome. I'm thankful for that. But you wouldn't pick the criminal and his idiot brothers, not raised like that. I wouldn't. Whereas there's some genius to that. Because I know when I became a Christian at 13, I came up with a plan. I would try to trick my friends. So what I'd do is I'd always ask them, hey, you want to come spend the night this weekend? Try to get them to spend the night weekend. They'd be like, yeah, we'll do Friday night. No, do Saturday. Because then as soon as they woke up, it'd be Sunday morning, they're early in bed. I'm like, come on, we're going to head over to church here. We're going to head to church. What? No, I'm not. No, you got to go. You want to stay here and be with my family? It's going to get creepy. Might as well go with me. Fine. I remember one of my friends was going through a lot of stuff, and I was like, man, he's got to be here, I'm like 14, 15 years old. He walks over with me, sitting in church, and the pastor, great guy, but he's just losing his mind, yelling. None of us know what we're talking about. As we got to the very end, I remember he looked at me, and he was like, I'm glad you like this, but it's not for me. I don't like it. And I remember thinking, it literally, destroyed me. I'm like, I just need him to understand the stuff I'm reading in here about Jesus, how he really feels about this kid. But he didn't. Is it kind of maybe genius? Right? What we think is a disadvantage in our story is actually the greatest advantage. Why? Because God can redeem your story for your purpose. That's the beauty of it all. And then the third part, and this is it, is your mess can become your message. Your mess can actually become your message. Look at verse 23. He says, all they knew was that people were saying the one who used to persecute us is now preaching the very faith he tried to destroy. And they praised God. Why? Because of me. They praised God because of my story. Paul's mess became his message. I'm telling you, all of you in this room, those of you watching online, your story, your mess, even the messiest parts of that, God says, no, I can turn it into a message for you. You can give people hope. You can encourage people. Oh, Trini, you don't want me. I've been divorced 6 times. Then you can give some hope to some people who have been there. I may not take marriage advice from you. Right? Fair enough. Right? I remember someone talking to me and they're like, yeah, I was talking to my neighbor and he's been telling me with my wife I need to. I was like, dude, he's been divorced 7 times. Go talk to some old couple who's 107 in a nursing home holding hands. They figured out something, right? But here's my point. He still can take your mess, though, and turn it into a message. All of us in here. Many of you know this, but my son was born profoundly deaf, completely deaf. I mean, there's not literally an airplane can fly by his head. Can't hear it. And went through hearing aids, lost hearing. and then ended up getting a cochlear implant. So now he can communicate. Great, thankful. God's been good. Here's what I'll say. We know of a kid who has severe special needs. And this kid is awesome. I love him. He's wide open. He has no sense of his surroundings. I imagine taking him into a funeral and he's going to be yelling and high-fiving. Like he has no clue. In a quiet moment, he doesn't care. He's a life. Awesome kid. Awesome kid. If I brought him today, all of you would love being around him. He's awesome. But you know what I notice? Anytime I'm with my family and Tayden's with me, this kid flies to him. Why? Why would he make a beeline? He likes everybody, but why does he always want to be by him? Because my son's an amazing kid? No, he's a terrible kid, right? Why does he want to be with him, honestly? Because I think he sees something. See, he sees, hey, even though he can't explain it, he knows you've got something too. Your mess can become your message. That's the good news. You see, your story and my story, I fully believe, are our secret superpower. Because you have a story that you can share, that God can use, that can do things I can never do. And here's the best part of this. So we're talking about today, first kind of week of our purpose. And I want you to see this. Your story and where you've been and what you're doing, God literally can use. He can redeem. And it's going to probably lead you to think about your purpose and what's going on. But let's think forward too. I was thinking, let's think about your future story and what kind of story you want to tell. So I want to encourage you guys today, okay? And this kind of, we're on the tail end of closing this thing out, but I want to think about your story ahead. And I was thinking about what are 3 kind of questions for your future story, okay? And I really want you to think about this. 3 future questions. I'll start with an L. And the first is this: legacy. What story do you want to tell? See, I get it. Some of you are in here like, Trent, that sounds cool. You do. I get it, man. You're a church guy. I get it. You're on stage. You're supposed to say stuff like this. But can I just be honest for you? Can I just love you for a second? I work at a factory, okay? I grind every day. I get it. But I'm a nurse at the hospital, and it sounds good in theory here, but we know how Mondays work. Mondays when reality hits. I get it. But can I challenge all of you in this room? I don't care what you do. I don't care where you've been. To maybe one time in your life, just stop for a second and say, what story do I want to tell when this is all said and done? Who do I really want to be? And what has my story taught me up to this point that's maybe molded me in a way that hasn't molded anyone else? What story do I really want to tell? I was thinking about your beginning story never has to be your ending story. It doesn't. Second part is, what role am I trying to play? You see, I've been coaching at a new school this year. I'm at a high school, so I'm meeting all these kids that I've never met before. And I've been with them since the summer, so it's been kind of neat to me, kind of a change of pace and different people. But I'll say this, and I'll say it about all the years I've taught and coached. You start getting to know people, and you realize there are some high school kids that have to grow up real quick. Some of you in this room get that. See, some of you have a great life, and I'm thankful for that. I want my kids to have a great life. I ain't going to lie. I don't want it to be hard. But some of you in this room are like, oh, I know hard. I know hard. I was thinking about one of the kids on the team who never quits, super tough kid, and I thought, you know why? You know why he's got that grit? Because he's got nothing. He's got nothing to go home to. He's a survivor. You see, other people are like, oh, it's just getting hard, I'm going to quit. He's like, this is every day for me. Right? It's messy. It's tough. It is. But here's why I try to harp. I try to harp it here. I try to harp it with the people I'm around here. I try to harp it with teams when I taught. Try to get in people's mind. Try to do it for my kids, for my wife. Is this: no excuses. No blame. No victims. Now, please don't take this wrong. Some of you in here are like, if you know what happened to me when I was 7, yeah, it's awful. You are a victim. I'm just going to challenge you maybe not to stay the victim. Because if you play the victim, you stay the victim. And luckily, I believe in a God who says, I agree, that was awful and horrific, and I don't want it on anybody. But you know what? You don't have to stay there. You don't have to live in it. You don't have to blame all your problems on everybody else all the time. You actually can take some responsibility. There's a lady who attends here. I love her. I love her. She's so awesome. She's fiery. She snaps back at me. She tells me the way it is. Awesome. And just a few weeks back, I was talking. She's like, boyfriend, and she's like, I tell you, he's been doing this. She's going nuts. She's like, all his fault. And I literally, we're right here. I said, all his fault? She said, yes. And I said, look, it's probably, I'm a guy myself. Most of the time when my wife and I fight, it's 99% my fault. I agree with that. That's how it works. Fair enough. But I said, you can't say it's always all his fault. I said, you got to own just a little bit of the pie. You know what she said? I would, but it's all his fault. And when she said that, I was kind of waiting for her to laugh, like, okay, you're right, you got me. She stared me down for like a minute. I said 100% him, and she went 100%. All him, no me. And walked off. I kind of respect it in a way, don't you? Like, that, hold your ground. But you know, life isn't great that way. All of us in this room, all of us, myself included, again, oh no, well, they did this and they did, no. I'm on some of this. I'm not going to take the blame, and I'm not going to just say it was my fault when something horrific happens to me, but there's things out of my control. You know what? What role am I going to play? Overcomer? Victor? Victim? What role? That's a good question. And the last one's probably the most important. Love. You see, if you want to live a life that's lived well, love well. Say it one more time. If you want to live a life, a true life, when this is all said and done, and they put you in a box that's lived well, love well. You know, this past week we did a celebration of life for C3. Great guy. I mean, heartbreaking, tragic. And the thing that stood out to me the most of all of that, of all things, you know, not perfect. Everybody say that. None of us are perfect. We get it. But I thought, you know what? Did I think try to love well? And when you try to love people well, you know what happens? You live well. Now you're like, oh, no, I'm sure he had enemy. Yeah, I get that. But it's the same for all of us in this room. We mess up. But what if we said, you know what? What does love require of me? That I love well. What about the next time you're at work or you're at home or you're getting ready to go to war with your wife? What if you just stopped and said, okay, just in your own mind, don't say it out loud. What does love require of me right now? What's it look like to love well in this moment? And listen, some of you are like, Trina, I get so tired of your flowery love crap. Can I just call it out? Everything's love. It's not like that. No. Sometimes love is me. Sometimes love for you. You know what? I had a tough conversation this week. Let me tell you this. I didn't say this in 9:30. When you guys hear this, tough conversation with a kid who I think the world of. And man, this kid deserves the world to me. And I knew it was going to go bad because I was about to tell him some bad news that he did not want to hear. And I walked right up to him. I said, hey, we need to talk. And I looked at this kid and I said, you're not going to like this. Let me just put it out there. And I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I told him how proud I was, all this stuff. But I told him tough stuff. And he's an amazing kid. Took it great. Took it amazing. But you know what? Sometimes when you love people, sometimes you got to say what you at least believe is true. Right? It's not always just, everything's okay. Sometimes I love my kids enough that I say stuff to them, and they're like, they don't like it. And I could be wrong. I'm okay with that. But I'm like, it's because I love you. That's what love looks like. So here's kind of the good news of all this, okay, as we get out of here. Some of the worst scenes create the best stories. Do you know that? Some of the worst things. Some of you in here are thinking about your life and thinking about different things that happen, and you're like, but Trina, you understand, that was the worst scene of my life. I talked to someone just this morning who's going through what I believe, hands down, I can't imagine anything worse, the worst scene of their life. And I didn't say it because it's too raw, but I wanted to be like, this worst scene can be turned into a great story. You know why I mentioned Rockies in the beginning? To me, they're great. They're great, awesome movies. But you know why? Because every movie has this scene or two or three scenes where it's like, it's the worst scene. But you know, and we know in life that one scene is not your whole story. It's just part of the story. The worst scenes make the greatest and the best stories. So I'll close with this. Told you in the beginning, right? You have Jews, this group of people, God's favorite people. Jesus comes on the scene, and he's like, I'm changing the game. There's a new covenant between God and man. Crazy. It goes deep, right? And I might be making this story a little too deep that I'm going to share with you, okay? I'm going to go ahead and say that out loud. So don't get online. Don't Google me. Don't be like, oh, I think. I'm telling you, I might be taking this overboard. Fair enough? Emmett, I don't know. Emmett's here. My boy Emmett, Mississippi. Emmett's in the back. Here's the thing I love about Emmett, okay? We'll be talking. See, Emmett's from Mississippi. So he's got way more like cool street cred than me. Okay, but here's the thing. I'll be talking to Emmett and I'll be going on about something and he'll go, bro, it ain't that deep. And I'm like, gosh, that sounds so cool. And see, even when I said it there, you guys didn't feel it, right? Because I'm just kind of a chubby, middle-aged white guy. But it's like, it's awesome. And that's a great phrase. So some of you, fair enough, when you listen to the story, you might be like, bro, it ain't that deep. May not be. But what if it is? You got Jewish people, God's favorite. You got Gentiles who the Jewish people were like, God could care less about them. That's us. Jesus comes on the scene and it's like, why are you talking to those people? And he's like, because you guys don't understand. My Father loves all these people. But there's a middle group. There's a group called the Samaritans. And you were a Samaritan if you had like a Jewish parent that married a Gentile. And this is like way back, deep-seated, what would be racism. It was like they considered them half-breeds. So they were considered the worst because, like, at least the Gentiles can all go do their junk together, and all of you, the Jewish people, we got our thing, but they don't fit anywhere, right? Because the Gentiles like, you're really not us because you kind of got that little bit of God stuff going on, and then these people are like, no, you're not us because your mama, whatever. Jesus one day is telling a story, and as he's talking, he's like, the old law said this, to love God with everything you have, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And a religious man, he's like, okay. Jesus, but who's my neighbor? Just the Jews? Because I'll love the Jews. We're just confused because we're thinking you're saying to love this group, and we don't like that. So who's my neighbor? And Jesus is like, okay. And instead of just answering a question, he's like, let me tell you a story. Guy was walking down Jericho. He tells this story like, oh, here we go. But he says, there was a man who, as he's walking by, gets beaten, left for dead, robbed. He's struggling. He's taking his last breath. And he says, a Jewish man walks by, a religious man, a priest's assistant. 3 different people walk by, all part of this in crowd. And they walk right by him. And then he hammers home. He says, and then a Samaritan. You see, you guys don't feel that story. And the reason you don't feel it is because Samaritan means good to us. Good Samaritan hospital. Hey, way to be a good Samaritan. But back then, when he said the word Samaritan, they all were like, oh. They're talking to each other like, they're the worst. Aren't they the worst? Probably was still more from him because everybody hates Samaritans. Look what he says, last verse. Luke 10:33. He says, then a despised Samaritan came along. I never noticed that till this week. A despised Samaritan. And when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Now, this is where I'm saying maybe I'm taking it too deep, but I don't think I am. This Samaritan might have been walking by, and he thought about when he was a kid. Maybe someone robbed his dad. Maybe someone left his dad for dead. Maybe they killed his dad. And he remembered all the Jewish people walking by and saying, good, celebrating. Maybe they spit on him. And all this moment, the worst scenes of his life, he's like, I can't do that. No, don't you understand? That guy probably hates you too. Okay. But he looked and he saw him and he had compassion because he lives there. It says when he looked at the guy, the despised one, the one everyone else hated, God's people, did the one thing no one else did. You know why? I truly believe because the worst scenes of his life created his greatest story. And for some of you in this room, I'm telling you, you've had a tough story. And I hate that. And I wish it was different. Some of you in here have had an amazing story. You know what you should do? Do something for me. Go home and thank your grandparents, whoever was part of your life that made it amazing, thank them. Because there's a lot of people in this room that would love to have what you had. They didn't. But here's the good news. I don't care how jacked up the scenes of your life have been or currently are. God will and can use them to create a greater story. Amen. That's how we start with our purpose. What are the stories that shape me and shape you? What are those stories? Because God can redeem every one of them. So this morning, if you would, just for a second, we're just going to close our eyes for just a second, all of us here. If you would, just a second, don't look around. Respect to the people here. Online, as you're watching this and looking at me, I'm going to ask you a question like I'm going to ask the people in this room, and here it is. Some of you in here are not only had lived a tough story, you're in the middle of a really tough scene right now. Really tough. I'm going to ask you this morning. Struggling? Feel like it's hopeless? Feel like you keep thinking it can get better, it should get better, I hope it gets better, and it's not. It keeps getting worse. Some of you maybe are here this morning for the first time because it's your last-ditch effort. Watching online, reach out to us, shoot us an email, comment, message us privately. But if you're in this room, I want to do something real important for you. I hate that for you. My heart breaks for you. But would you be bold enough today to just lift your hand and say, Trent, I'm in a tough scene right now. Could you pray for me? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. 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 Father, I do pray today for some people here who are in the middle of a really, really tough scene. God, I pray you would remind them that it's not the scene that defines us. It's what makes us. It's the scene that you use, even all the bad scenes in our life, to tell a really good story. God, I pray if nothing else with those people who raised their hand, there's some people in here who didn't even raise their hand because they're past that point. It doesn't even matter anymore. Pray you would do a miracle today for them. Pray you would do something in their hearts and in their lives that can only come from you. I pray you would give them a hope that no one can explain. I pray you give them a peace. More than anything, God, I pray that you do something to them that they know is from you and nobody else in some of the toughest scenes of their life. And for the rest of us, God, I pray today that we will walk out of here and tell a better story this week. We would tell a better story where maybe instead of being so negative and angry and everything's always somebody else, we take a little ownership. But more than anything, God, we could ask this question: did I love well today? Did I think about someone else over myself? God, how well did I love? Pray we love well this week. Pray we tell a better story. And I pray you encourage those who feel like there's no hope for the end of their story. The good news of the gospel is you redeem every story. You even take stuff that is dead and write great stories from it. So you can do it all. God, we beg you to do that today. Help us to not only learn from our story, but let's tell a better one this week. We ask these things in your name. And amen. You guys, man, so glad that you're here. Have a great week. Hopefully see you next week. Aaron's going to be talking about question number 2. See you then. You know, she'll get it, yeah. We're workers.
If there's one thing I know, hey, yeah, God is good all the time. If he ain't, then you lying.